Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Brief for Tuesday, February 6th, 2024. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Jenkins, president of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors this webcast. Dr. Jenkins is also chairman of the Washington Times Holdings, the LLC that owns the Times news organization. He has led many successful fact-finding trips to Korea for policy experts and peace initiatives to the Middle East for the Universal Peace Federation. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for all you do for the Washington Times Foundation and this wonderful program, the Washington Brief. Our moderator today is Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. Ambassador DeTrani is a commentator on security issues, formerly special envoy for the six-party talks with North Korea, the director of National Counterproliferation Center, and Associate Director of National Intelligence. Our panelist today is Dr. Alexandre Mansourov. Dr. Mansourov is an adjunct professor of security studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. He's also an adjunct professor of Korean studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins, and also the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Our keynote speaker today is the Honorable James Clapper. Director Clapper served as the fourth U.S. Director of National Intelligence from 2010 to 2017. In this position, Clapper led the United States intelligence community and served as the principal intelligence advisor to President Barack Obama. Prior to that, he had a distinguished career in the U.S. Air Force, including an appointment as Director of Defense Intelligence Agency. He retired with the rank of Lieutenant General in 1995. His intelligence-related positions over 32 years in uniform included Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence at the headquarters U.S. Air Force during Operation Desert Shield Desert Storm, and Director of Intelligence for the three combatant commands, U.S. Forces Korea Pacific Command and Strategic Air Command. He served 2 combat tours during the Southeast Asia conflict and flew 73 combat support missions in EC-47 aircraft over Laos and Cambodia. Prior to becoming Director of National Intelligence, Director Clapper served for over 3 years in 2 administrations as the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. His awards include 3 National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medals, 2 Defense Distinguished Service Medals, the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal, as well as numerous other U.S. and foreign government awards and decorations. We're going to have a wonderful program. Over to you, Ambassador DeTrani.
Thank you, Michael, and it's great having Director Clapper with us today. There's so much to discuss. Let me just sort of set the scene. This past month, lots have happened, and as our viewers, listeners all know, so much is going on. And again, we're very fortunate to have Director Clapper to talk about some of these issues. But indeed, the Taiwan elections, where the DPP candidate, Lai Ching-te, was successful with over 40% of the votes. Very, very significant development in Taiwan. Certainly in North Korea. Oh, my goodness. We saw over 3 ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missile launches. The last one was a solid fuel road mobile ICBM over 15,000 kilometers that could reach the whole of the United States, including over the past week, 3 cruise missile launches, very significant, submarine launched ballistic missiles, underwater drones, talking about short range, intermediate range ballistic missiles that could reach Guam. And then on the other side, the rhetoric coming out of Pyongyang, talking about South Korea as the principal enemy, making it very clear that they're not interested in reunification. A very, very major embrace of the Russian Federation. And we talked in our last program about the Kim Jong-un meeting with President Putin in the Far East, Russian Far East. But we also saw Chae Soon-hee, North Korea's foreign minister, visiting Moscow and meeting with Putin. And the significant developments between Russia and North Korea. with reported, very, very accurate reported information showing that North Korea is providing Russia with weaponry that's being used in the war in Ukraine. So a lot of developments with North Korea, and we're very fortunate in having Director Clapper with us today to unpack so many of these issues. So over to you, Director Clapper.
Joe, it's great to be with you. Joe and I are longstanding colleagues and friends from many gun battles in the intelligence community. I guess whenever I'm asked to speak about North Korea, I always have to caveat it with some statement about doing so with humility. I've followed developments on the peninsula ever since I served there in the mid-'80s as Director of Intelligence for U.S. Forces Korea. And, the more time I spend watching the peninsula, the more mystified I am. So I just want to inject a note of humility about that. Joe, ticked off a number of disturbing developments with respect to North Korea. I don't know if Joe mentioned this, but just announcing, for example, that South Korea is now the primary national enemy. I think that's probably been done before in the history of the Kim family, but in concert with all these other things, disestablishing several North Korean governmental bodies that were committed to supposedly reunification and reconciliation, destroyed the unification arch in Pyongyang. And Joe went through the recent events involving missile testing, which is very provocative. And of course, we're aware of his strengthened ties with Russia, providing him a lot of ammunition and missiles for that matter. And of course, as you'd expect with North Korea, amplified the steady stream of vitriolic rhetoric directed towards now the ROC and the United States. And of course, this has generated, as it inevitably does, a lot of media attention. Most notably, I think, a piece by two respected experts on the North. Robert Carlin, who served a long time in the State Department, INR, and Sig Hecker, who is widely known expert on North Korea, has traveled there. And they had a piece in the blog 38 North, which was entitled, "Is Kim Jong-un Preparing for War?" Which I think is probably the nominal subtitle of this discussion. Their answer clearly was yes. And to have those two say so, I think, is quite significant. And they say, and I'm quoting here, "The situation on the Korean Peninsula is more dangerous than it has been at any time since early June 1950. They believe that, quote, Kim has made a strategic decision to go to war." Well, I would take mild and respectful exception to this assertion. I believe the situation that ensued after the tree cutting incident in the DMZ in 1978 was at least as serious. And I was kind of involved peripherally in that. I was a young Air Force intelligence staff officer during my first tour at the Pacific Command headquarters. And I lived through that episode. And the genuine fear of war was palpable then. We had nuclear armed B-52s flying patrols up and down the DMZ. So having lived through that, and I still have pretty vivid memories of it, even though it was a long time ago, I would say that was at least comparable to the situation now. And by the way, that is always the kind of thing that I worried the most about. Certainly when I served there, was some incident turning incendiary and exploding into a larger conflagration, not necessarily a planned invasion of the South. And right now, I think it's kind of counterintuitive that the North would launch an attack on the South while they are so aggressively and robustly supplying apparently large quantities of war munitions to their newfound friend, Russia. Interestingly, Kim recently called Putin the Korean people's closest friend, which Josh Rogin, in an op-ed piece for the Washington Post, characterizes a passive-aggressive dig at Beijing. And again, I read some significance into that because, you know, the major patron for North Korea has traditionally been China. So a couple of general comments which I'm sure you can take issue with about North Korea based on my following developments on the peninsula ever since I served there, and certainly, and it's been now four decades, and also my visit there in 2014, and at the time I was the first cabinet level official to go there after Madeleine Albright had 14 years before. North Korea has almost always been on the brink of war, and it's what they use to rationalize to their citizens why they must endure privations because of the ever-present threat posed by the ROC and the Republic of Korea and the United States. And they use that rationale to make these huge investments now in nuclear weaponry and missiles, et cetera. And in my view, what really motivates the North Koreans more than anything is paranoia, and importantly, the desire to be respected as a nuclear power. Face is all important to them. And when they don't feel they are getting the attention and respect they deserve, they conduct provocative acts and step up the bellicose propaganda simply to call attention to themselves and to remind people that they are important. And this has been kind of a cyclical behavior pattern of theirs for decades. And that, by the way, is why, as Joe knows, I became an advocate for recognizing reality and acknowledging officially that they have nuclear capabilities. And doing so doesn't raise or lower the intrinsic threat that they pose one bit, and plays to their need for face, for respect, and maybe puts them in a better mood to negotiate. Even if we were to reach that point, which is extremely unlikely now, I think the best we could hope for is some sort of arms control arrangement, which would take years to implement. At this point, I don't see much prospect for reducing tensions, unfortunately. It doesn't appear that the administration is real interested in pursuing some sort of initiative. And even if they were, I think we've lost what a lot of the leverage we once had to induce real change in the North's behavior. And to repeat, as they've said, they've given up on diplomacy, at least with us. I think at one point they were interested in diplomacy and were interested in negotiation, and were interested in recognition. I don't think so now. Others, most notably the Chinese, will have to fill that void. And I don't see much incentive on their part either. Preservation of North Korea as a buffer state has always been a strategic imperative of the Chinese. It's why they intervened in the Korean War. And I don't think that's changed any. They will pressure North Korea, but only to a point. But I will say I think it's they can't be happy about this newfound love-in with Putin. And for his part, he's not the least bit interested in reducing tensions on the peninsula. There is the possibility, I suppose, that which some have suggested, that maybe Kim is posturing for our election to put himself in a better negotiating position if he believes that Trump will win again, or posturing for forthcoming elections in South Korea. I don't know. So I will end this litany of doom with saying the same thing I said at the outset, that anytime you start talking about North Korea, you do so with humility, because I don't profess to have any great insight into the geopolitical thinking, such as it is, that goes on in North Korea. So, Joe, over to you.
Thank you, James. That really outstanding, Director Clapper. There's a lot to unpack with those comments. Over to you, Alexander, and let's start the dialogue.
Hey, hello, everybody, and thank you, Director Clapper, for your outstanding overview of what's going on the peninsula today. Let me share my thoughts about the latest trends, and then I'll ask you a question if you don't mind, sir. Now, clearly, Kim Jong-un went out of his way to deliver a message that his government has abandoned the peaceful unification line, which has been, the family business of the Mangyondae dynasty for over 7 decades. The peaceful unification strategy, it's his parents' legacy, his father and grandfather's legacy. Not only did the North Koreans declare the South as their principal enemy, but as you correctly pointed out, they decided to disband most of the government organizations involved in the inter-Korean cooperation and reconciliation. They announced amendments to the North Korean constitution aimed at deleting all references to unification, to Koreas as one people. Again, they're mounting a propaganda campaign internally to convince the North Korean people that this unification is not the goal of the regime anymore, that they're different. Again, we saw that before in East Germany in the 1970s. The East German regime declared that they're different, and yet 20 years later, the country was unified. On the one hand, on the other hand, of course, when Ukraine says it's different, it doesn't want to be part of one state with Russia. We accept it and say, yes, that's fine. When Palestine says, they're different, they want basically to have a 2-state solution, we say that's fine. And yet with North Korea, this departure from the unification line of 70 years, which was symbolized by the demolition of the unification arch in Pyongyang a couple of weeks ago, is something very serious. Although, again, many experts believe it's primarily rhetoric aimed at domestic audience, but maybe, as some experts suggest, that might indicate a dramatic shift in North Korean kind of overall strategy, and they're preparing now for war. As you mentioned, long-time observers of North Korea, Bob Karlin and Sig Heka, suggested that Kim Jong-un might be preparing for a kinetic action to conquer South Korea, which, by the way, is not something new. As you know, Rand Corporation a couple of years ago produced a study suggesting this might be the ultimate strategic goal of the Kim family. And if you add to that the acceleration of the WMD programs, as Ambassador DeTrani correctly pointed out, with all the latest ICBM tests, the tests of cruise missiles, surface-based, submarine-based, what have you, clearly, the impression one gets that something unusual, which we haven't seen before, might be unfolding before our eyes. And then, of course, here is my question. I mean, has the Biden administration really dropped the ball? Because, they seem to have tried a lot of things, strengthening our deterrence capabilities, obviously expanding the military drills with our allies in the region, tightening the sanctions on North Korea and its suppliers, and yet nothing seems to be working. As you, sir, correctly pointed out, they haven't been engaged in any dialogue with North Korea for a long time now, except that public position, anytime, anywhere, no preconditions. They're going to meet with Kim, but again, probably nothing behind it. And in reality, we know that the presidential envoy retired, another senior official who took his place, basically is traveling around Papua New Guinea and other Pacific islands. Again, the NIO position for North Korea has been vacant for many months. So have they dropped the ball? And if not, what else can be done to address the North Korean threat? You indicated that possibly one day, not today, but at some distant future, the United States might kind of open its mind to the arms control negotiations with North Korea. Not CVID type, but, recognizing the reality, kind of sitting down and talking about possible limitations on the nuclear pursuits. I mean, could you kind of elaborate a little bit your thinking on that? And again, what else can be done to really kind of stop that threat from growing? Thank you.
Of course, that's a great question. I think at one point, for example, I think the North Koreans would have been very interested in exchanging interest sections in each of the capitals, Pyongyang and Washington. I think the notion of insisting on and Joe and I have had this discussion many times before on insisting on denuclearization is a non-starter with them. A more longer term approach might be to acknowledge North Korea's nuclear weapons and treat them as a nuclear power, and of course, elicit or induce more responsible behavior on their part. I think the problem, though, is any such initiative like that by this administration or any other for that matter would run into a buzzsaw domestically. Domestic politics just won't allow that. So we're kind of stuck. I think the administration, and you're quite right, what they've done is amplify, reinforce, emphasize our alliance with both the Republic of Korea and Japan, for that matter, which is good to do. I mean, if we're going to negotiate with them, we should do so from a position of strength and unity with our allies. But at this point, I think any great new idea that any of us might have about how to approach the North Koreans is kind of a dead letter, just because of the domestic politics. Anything that would look like a concession to the North Koreans, and what I'm suggesting is, I guess, clearly a concession. We're just acknowledging truth here that North Korea is, in fact, a nuclear power. Okay, let's treat them like one and persuade them that as accordingly they need to behave more responsibly. But I think any outreach to North Korea beyond reinforcing sanctions, which, as we all know, we were doing sanctions when I was there in South Korea. And they've always evaded them, figured out ways to get around them. So that, when we say we're going to tighten sanctions, well, that's puffing and puffing, but not blowing their house down, so to speak. So and I don't necessarily fault the administration for this. I mean, they've got some other issues on their mind right now, Israel and, the Middle East and Ukraine, et cetera. There's just so much bandwidth, I guess. And I think any kind of new, imaginative, creative, innovative initiative that you might come up with will run into a domestic political buzzsaw.
Interesting comments, Director Clapper. Very, very insightful. Let me, and you and I have discussed this in the past, and I truly appreciate your views on this. And there's a lot to be said about what you just said about recognizing the reality. But on the other side, South Korea just recently, over 70% of the population said, well, maybe we need our own nuclear weapons capability. Despite the enhanced deterrence, extended deterrence commitments from the United States, over 70% of the population saying, well, maybe we need to, sort of like de Gaulle in France in the 60s to President John F. Kennedy, thank you for the nuclear umbrella, but we need to have our own deterrence capabilities, thus our own nuclear capabilities. So could you address, how do you see the South Korea and Japan and maybe others in the region reacting to, let's say, the United States recognizing North Korea, accepting North Korea as a nuclear weapon state, but the possibility of nuclear proliferation in the region, and maybe even nuclear proliferation in a different way we saw North Korea providing Syria with the capabilities of having a nuclear weapons capability with a nuclear reactor program in Al-Kabar in Syria. So how would you address those comments, Director Clapper, from those who say this could lend itself, if we accept North Korea as a nuclear weapon state, this could lend itself to a nuclear arms race in the region and maybe to even nuclear proliferation to rogue states or non-state terrorist organizations?
Recognizing de facto the fact that North Korea is a nuclear state. I don't think the acknowledgement of that in any way increases the threat, nor necessarily is a trigger for or a stimulus for others acquiring their own nuclear capability. Frankly, when I think about it historically, I'm kind of surprised we've been able to sustain this policy as long as we have, where Japan and the Republic of Korea have been content to, at least their governments have, to rely on the nuclear umbrella, extended nuclear umbrella of the United States. And it shouldn't be surprising to anyone that there is a strong sentiment in the Republic for a nuclear capability, given the growth and the sophistication, apparently, and the nuclear capabilities of the North. So this is not quite surprising, not surprising at all to me. What is surprising is that our policies worked and has been successful as long as it has. So I don't really think that would necessarily be a trigger for, say, the ROC obtaining their own nuclear capabilities. I think both states are technologically capable, both Japan and the Republic. And to date, we've been successful in persuading them to rely on us. But I don't know that we can sustain that, particularly given the growth of the North's apparent nuclear capability. Of course, neither they nor we know that they'll actually work, but It doesn't matter. The perception is they will, and that in itself is what deterrence is all about, which another thing I think Kim Jong-un is very interested in is deterrence.
Right, right. Thank you, Director Clapper. Alexander.
Yes, thank you, Ambassador. Of course, Japan has been known for dramatic shifts in its foreign policy. If you look back at history, I'm talking about hundreds of years, whether it's the Russo-Japan War, or whether it's Pearl Harbor, or whether it's possibly what might happen in the future. So I was intrigued by your comment about Japan, and I'd like to kind of drill down a little bit on that by asking you whether Japan continues to be a serious factor in international politics in that region or not, because some people outside the United States, they seem to dismiss that or discount the role of Japan. Again, you talked about the trilateral cooperation between Japan, South Korea, and the United States in dealing with the North Korean threat. And I'm really wondering whether that could make a difference at all. One aspect of that, of course, is intelligence cooperation. And as you know very well, there are some folks in both Japan and South Korea that yearn for being invited to the Five Eyes Alliance, the intelligence sharing alliance. What's your take on this? Should the United States invite Tokyo and Seoul to join the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance? Or there are too many issues and problems for them to kind of reach that bar?
First of all, as you know, there's historical and cultural animosities between Japan and the Republic of Korea, which the United States consistently has tried to overcome and to bring the two allies together. And I think there's been progress there, but there's still, I believe, kind of a diffidence, if you will, between the two. And then certainly in my various capacities in the intelligence community, I did try to push intelligence cooperation between Japan and Korea, because they do have a common threat. And we in turn have enhanced our intelligence sharing with each of these countries. We have a pretty intimate relationship with both Japan and Korea. As far as Five Eyes membership, well, you always have to remember there are 4 other countries that get a vote in that alliance, and I don't see that happening. Maybe someday there could be, we have, as some people call it, sort of 5.5 allies, and we have some very close and pervasive and ubiquitous intelligence relationships with many countries. Some of whom I think would probably rank ahead of Japan and Korea in terms of intelligence sharing. That would be, I think, probably more appealing candidates to the other members of the Five Eyes Alliance than Japan and Korea right now. Maybe later, yes. But that's not to say that the relationships have not deepened and improved over the years. That's something we've consistently pushed.
Right. That's excellent. Director Clapper, let me ask you this. You mentioned your visit to North Korea, to Pyongyang in 2014, and you came back with Kenneth Bae and Matthew Miller, and we thank you for that. Could you give us, the audience, a little sense of your interaction with the North Koreans during your visit? As you just mentioned, you were the first cabinet member to visit since Madeleine Albright in 2000. What were some of your impressions during your visit to Pyongyang? And again, we want to thank you for bringing back those 2 Americans, Kenneth Bae and Matthew Miller. Thank you.
Having followed the peninsula for a long time, and North Korea is, a very mysterious place, and so it was quite a profound experience, personal experience for me to go. And I guess as a general observation, I think everything you've ever read about what a bizarre place North Korea is, it's all true. It is a bizarre place. The sense of paranoia is palpable there. At least when I was there, I mean, you can almost feel it. Everywhere they look, they don't see very many friends, even the Chinese. I was treated overall, it was very hostile. When I first arrived, they were expecting to use their word, a breakthrough. And they thought by my dispatch to North Korea that this was the first step in changing the relationship, leading perhaps to diplomatic recognition. And when they learned that, I was in a limo with my host after about 5 minutes, and they found out, I said, no, I'm just here to pick up our two guys. They were bitter about that. Very upset, very disappointed. My primary interlocutor was Kim Yong-chul, who at the time was head of their Reconnaissance General Bureau, their North Korean version of the GRU. And he touted himself as my nominal counterpart. And I guess that's right. He was. He later became the love letter deliverer between Kim Jong-un and President Trump. He's extremely hostile, very nasty. We had our major discussion during during a 13-course dinner, which was very nice. It was wonderful food, all that. Oddly enough, it was staged over a bowling alley in Pyongyang. So we had a lot of finger pointing and chest pounding at each other, and I think the only debate point that I was able to score with the North Koreans was when I cited the example of Vietnam. And the 2 tours I spent there fighting the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. And now we have diplomatic relations with the Vietnamese, economic relations, political, diplomatic, even intelligence relations. And I said to them, so could it be with North Korea? I think that's the only point that struck home. I didn't get a pushback at that. But the main objective of my trip was to get our 2 citizens out of hard labor. And we sat through a bizarre amnesty granting ceremony in a hotel in Pyongyang. And, we weren't sure we were going to get them up until the last minute. And the North had us sit around their state guest house in nominal house arrest is what it amounted to, and awaiting some word on whether they were going to release them or not. But I'm still struck by that. The one debate point I thought I was able to make about the comparison with the former enemy. I said, the United States has no permanent enemies. And I cited the case of Germany and Japan. And then most recently, the personal experience of my first tour in Vietnam in 65 and 66. And I went back 43 years later, and how much things had changed and how much the relationship between our 2 countries had changed. And as I said to them, that could be the same for the DPRK.
So do you think, Director Clapper, on that point, do you think that could be resurrected in any way? I mean, we saw in 2018 in the Singapore summit with the former President Donald Trump, Kim Jong-un, and if you will, that agreement that there would be a transformation of a relationship, North Korea would commit to complete verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and there are no nuclear weapons in the Republic of Korea, so it's North Korea. So it fell apart, obviously, in Hanoi in 2019. But do you think that's something that could be resurrected, movement in that direction, given what you just said about Vietnam and what we saw in Singapore?
Hope springs eternal. I don't know whether that, this is one of the, the imponderables of North Korea. What would be appealing to them now? I don't know, frankly. I think I had some idea what might have been appealing some years ago, but I don't know. I do think that starting off our position with "you must denuclearize" won't work with them. Their they made it very clear to me, their nuclear weapons are their ticket to survival. And they recited to me some history, Muammar Gaddafi, for example, who negotiated away his weapons of mass destruction, and things didn't turn out so well for him. Well, the North Koreans are not stupid, and they are rational in their way. And so I think if we're going to make some approach that might lead to a Vietnam-like arrangement, which I think is a long way away, we're going to have to come up with some other approach other than starting the discussion with "you must denuclearize."
Thank you, Director Clapper. Alexander.
Thank you. Very interesting recollections. Thank you, Director, for sharing those with us. Let me just kind of drill down a little bit here on this question of normalization. As you know, there is a debate in this country about Kim's intentions, whether he really has given up on this idea of normalization with the United States. And people who believe it, they say his pivot to Russia explains, can be explained by his basically giving up on any possibility of better relationship with the United States. Or, as you indicated in your earlier remarks, that maybe no, he is positioning himself now for re-engaging with the United States if President Trump is elected, and then maybe he'll try to transform the U.S.-North Korean relationship once again. So I just want to kind of pin you down. Where do you stand on this one? Have they given up on normalization, or are they still open to it, just waiting for President Trump to be elected? And if it's the latter, then what happens if President Trump does not get elected, and for 4 more years there's another deep freeze in U.S.-North Korean relationship? Then will that kind of further solidify the pivot to the north, if you wish? The north will go further north, cementing its relationship with Moscow, and then we'll basically have no choice but giving up on a better future, like Vietnam and U.S.-North Korean relationship.
Those are great questions, and I don't know the answer. This is the case where it's very difficult to know what's in the minds of the Kim family. I think to some extent he's kind of a pragmatist, and right now it's convenient and appealing to him to align himself with Russia. And there has to be some, again, the importance of face. There has to be some satisfaction that Kim is getting from, as a more or less former subordinate of the Soviet Union / Russia, now to be aiding them, helping them, and seeing the use of the North Korean weapons actually being used in live combat. So I think that in itself is kind of appealing to him. And whether or not he will ever be in a mode again to engage with us. I mean, he didn't go away very happy from the summit in Hanoi, which was kind of a failure. So I don't know that necessarily that if former President Trump becomes President Trump again, that necessarily would be appealing to him. I think he would have to have some conditions laid out before there would be any kind of another summit between the two. So I don't know. I don't know what would appeal to him. Right now, he's kind of thrown in with the Russians, but I think that could change very easily and gravitate back to China. Who knows? And I think, you know, if President Biden's reelected, well, he'll just bide his time. And if it turns out to be President Trump, whether that would be whether he'd find that appealing or not, I don't know.
You know, on that point, though, Director Clapper, thinking back to 2010 and the Chong incident where 46 sailors were killed when the North Koreans took down the Chong frigate in the Yellow Sea. And then the YPDO, 4 civilians were killed, 19 casualties, wounded individuals there. So the possibility, if you will, some would say maybe even the likelihood of an incident of that type sparking a confrontation and escalation and so forth. How do you see that? As you know, there's a lot of discussion about accidental conflict and possibly even accidental war, and we're talking now about the possibility of tactical nuclear weapons, maybe even strategic nuclear weapons. How do we see sort of to defuse this possibility? Many have talked about, and I often talk about China and the leverage China has with the Peace and Friendship Treaty, 90% of the trade and crude oil, over 90% coming from China. They did that with the 6-party talks. They brought North Korea back into negotiations with the United States and others for the 6-party talks. Could China do this again? Shouldn't we be looking for a way to prevent the possibility of escalation so that we would not see accidental conflict?
So as I briefly mentioned in my opening remarks, certainly the thing I worried the most about when I served there in the mid-'80s as the J2 Director of Intelligence for U.S. Forces Korea was some incident that would just, you know, rapidly get out of control. That almost happened with the tree cutting incident. That's why that was so prevalent in my mind when I went there. 10 years later, as the J2 was another incident like the tree cutting, which could easily have exploded into a full-fledged war. Now, fortunately, when these other incidents, as serious as they have been, when they've occurred, cooler heads have prevailed, and they didn't explode into a war, and that's always a possibility, and to me is the most likely catalyst for a war would be something like that rather than a planned invasion. I don't really see that. I think with all the destructive power at Kim Jong-un's fingertips now with his nuclear weapons, I think he's actually less likely to use them because I think they understand what would happen to them if they were actually to an all-out attack on the South. So I think that's a much less likely probability than some small incident exploding. Now, what to do about it? Well, we don't really have a regular established mechanism. It's just that people, including the Chinese, have I think tried to, keep things under control. And that about all we can do is hope that mechanism works again.
Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you. If you don't mind, Director Clapper, I'd like to pivot in a different direction. And I mean, you're one of the most prominent adult supervisors in this country. You're the brain power, obviously, and for many years you actually were an architect of our one of the architects of our national security policy. So I'd like to tap your brain with respect to a grand strategy question. Now, as you know, the United States is waging a total hybrid war against Russia. It's trying to decouple itself from China. And again, the relationship is increasingly confrontational with China. We are waging a campaign now in the Middle East against Iranian proxies there as we speak, actually. And this conflict there is only escalating in the Middle East. And on the Korean Peninsula, two senior analysts issued a warning for war that Kim has made a strategic decision to go to war, not necessarily today, tomorrow, even this year, but his mind is set on that. Some people call it the axis of authoritarianism, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And clearly, this country at least appears to be taking on all four of them at the same time. And so my question to you is about grand strategy. Is it a good idea or not to take on, the second largest superpower, another great power, major regional power, major state in Northeast Asia at the same time? Is the United States ready for this? Are we, do we have sufficient resources, political will, and public support here to pursue that very ambitious goal aimed at strategic defeat of Russia, suffocation of China, strangulation of North Korea, dismantlement of the Iranian regime? Or would it be a wiser strategy to do like our predecessors did, divide and rule, kind of pit them against each other instead of taking on them at the same time? I'd like your kind of voice, to hear your voice as adult supervisor. Are we doing the right thing here or not?
It's another good time for humility. I do think this administration is attempting to reach out to China and to try to relax tensions. And with the Secretary of State, and for that matter, President Biden and President Xi, there is dialogue there. I think that's absolutely crucial. So I do think of the four, bad guys, if you will, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, that I think there is a difference with respect to China. I do think we are trying to reach out to them. The thing with China is at the same time we are simultaneously adversaries, competitors, and in some instances, hopefully, like with climate change, partners. And unlike the Soviet Union, when in the great heyday of the Cold War, where the two economies, the Soviet economies and ours, were essentially mutually exclusive. Well, not so with China, where the two economies are inextricably bound. And we could do a lot of bad things to the Chinese in the economic realm, and so could they to us. And I think there is a recognition of that. And there has been, I think, an honest effort made by the administration to reach out to China and relax tensions and maintain a dialogue. And I think that's that's really important that we do that. So I think it's a little different with them than the other three. We're not in any kind of serious dialogue with Russia. I don't think so, or with Iran, or certainly not with North Korea. But I think China's in a different category.
So on that point, Director Clapper, on China, we just saw, as we talked about, or I mentioned briefly, the election in Taiwan, where Lai Ching-te was a successful DPP candidate and will be sworn in May. A lot of attention on in the Taiwan Strait on that issue, where China was, some would say, trying to intimidate the 23 million citizens in Taiwan during the election and so forth. So how do you see the Taiwan issue? Our commitment with the Taiwan Relations Act and the 6 assurances of a peaceful resolution, and China saying they want to seek a peaceful resolution, but if necessary, they'll use whatever means, to include kinetic means, to unify with Taiwan. How do you see that issue affecting the U.S. relationship with the People's Republic of China?
See, it's at the forefront of it. I mean, that's we've subscribed to the One China policy and advocated peaceful reunification, and certainly the Taiwanese electorate conveyed, as you mentioned, conveyed a message here with the election of basically an anti-unification administration. How we navigate this relationship, and the policy we followed of strategic ambiguity, which, say what you will about it, it's worked so far. I don't know whether it will in the future. I think President Xi, for his part, has made it pretty clear that at some point, Taiwan is going to become part of mainland China, part of PRC. I don't know how that's going to unfold, Joe. I really don't. And I don't know, push came to shove, if God forbid the Chinese did invade, a kinetic invasion, if you will, of Taiwan, just what we do. I don't know. And so I guess there's something to be said for strategic ambiguity, because it's a mystery to me too. So again, this is an imponderable question, which I approach with great humility. But I do go back to the business about the 3 corners of the relationship we have with China, which is adversary, competitor, and partner all at once. And somehow we're going to have to figure out how those 3 dimensions work and their interplay, and how that's all going to come out. I don't know. I think right now I don't believe the Chinese have the capability to mount a successful invasion. I don't think Xi would permit an attempt unless he were convinced that the success was almost a certainty. I think probably I'm sure the Chinese have gone to school on the Russian experience in Ukraine. And what the Chinese would have to do is a lot more difficult than what the Russians have tried to do in Ukraine. And I'm sure they've watched all that very carefully.
How do you see a blockade, Director Clapper? Some have talked about a blockade where,
I think that's probably a more likely scenario, a blockade. And I think the Chinese could do a lot of bad things to the Taiwanese and cyber realm. So perhaps that approach, rather than a kinetic one, might be more likely and certainly less destructive, and also I think harder for us to deal with.
Yes. Thank you, Director Clapper. Look, we could go on, Alexander and I, with Director Clapper for a long time here. Such unique insight you're sharing with all of us. So we really want to thank you. And I want to just commend you also for the book, Facts and Fears by James Clapper. Let me just mention this book. If one wants to really get into the mind of former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, read the book. A lot of unique insights. And thank you so much for spending this time with us. But indeed, thank you so much for your service to our country and for keeping us and our allies and partners safe and secure. So thank you, Director Clapper.
Thank you.
Very, very kind, and I appreciate the plug for the book since it's been out now for 6 years, so thank you for that.
It's worth reading. Thank you. Michael, over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for another well-done program on Indo-Pacific enters uncertain territory. And you always handle these programs with such care and knowledge. And thank you, Dr. Mansourov, for your intriguing questions and also helping us go deeper. And to Director Clapper, we're honored to have you with us today, and we really thank you for your insights and wisdom and experiences. I want to thank the Washington Times, which will cover this program, and also I want to thank the Universal Peace Federation for their support also. We will see you on the first Tuesday of every month. We're here on the Washington Brief. Thank you.